The eviction notice arrived on a Tuesday morning, taped to the apartment door like a death sentence written in legal terminology. Sarah Chen stood in the hallway of the Riverside Towers, her 7-year-old daughter Maya pressed against her side, both of them staring at the document that spelled out their future in clinical language. Failure to pay rent. 72 hours to vacate. Legal action will be pursued. Maya's small voice cut through the silence. "Mommy, what does eviction mean?" Sarah knelt, pulling her daughter close, breathing in the strawberry scent of her shampoo, trying to find words that wouldn't terrify a child who'd already witnessed too much. "It means we need to find a new place to live, sweetheart. An adventure." But adventures required money, and Sarah had exactly $847 in her checking account. The divorce had stripped her of everything except Maya and a crushing sense of failure. Derek had been methodical in his destruction, hiring lawyers who cost more per hour than Sarah made in a week at the medical billing company. He'd convinced the judge that his pharmaceutical sales career made him the more stable parent, that Sarah's emotional instability following his affair made her unfit for primary custody. The affair. Sarah could still see Vanessa's face, Derek's co-worker, younger and polished, standing in their kitchen that October morning wearing Derek's shirt and a smile that said she'd already won. The divorce papers had arrived 3 weeks later, along with Derek's petition for full custody, claiming Sarah's aggressive behavior when she'd thrown a coffee mug at the wall made her dangerous. She hadn't been dangerous. She'd been destroyed. The custody battle had consumed her savings, her energy, her faith in justice. Derek's lawyers painted her as unstable, unemployed by choice, living off his generosity. They ignored that she'd quit her job to care for his mother during chemotherapy, that she'd supported his career moves across 3 states, that she'd been the one holding their family together while he worked late with Vanessa. In the end, the judge awarded Derek primary custody, Sarah's supervised visitation every other weekend, and child support payments that barely covered groceries. The apartment in Riverside Towers had been the cheapest she could find, and now even that was slipping away. Sarah carried the eviction notice inside, setting it on the kitchen counter beside the stack of medical bills from Maya's emergency room visit last month when she'd fallen at the playground. Broken wrist for $1,300 after insurance. Payment plans that Sarah couldn't maintain alongside rent and utilities and the endless grinding mathematics of poverty. Her phone buzzed. Derek's name appeared on the screen with a text message that felt like salt in fresh wounds. "Heard about the eviction. Maya can stay with me full-time. You need to get your life together. This isn't about punishing you. It's about what's best for our daughter." Our daughter. As if he'd been present for the midnight fevers and playground tears and homework struggles. As if his money entitled him to parenthood without the actual work of parenting. Sarah deleted the message without responding, then immediately regretted it. Everything she said or didn't say would be used against her in court. Derek was building a case for full custody, documenting every failure, every mispayment, every sign that Sarah couldn't provide stability. The lawyer's voice echoed in her memory from their last consultation, the one she couldn't afford to continue. "Without significant change in your circumstances, the judge will likely grant his petition. You need steady income, stable housing, evidence of emotional stability. Right now, you're fighting uphill." Maya appeared in the kitchen doorway, dragging her stuffed rabbit by one ear. "Can we have spaghetti for dinner?" "Of course, baby." Sarah forced brightness into her voice, pulling out the generic pasta and jar sauce that would stretch across 3 meals if she was careful. "Why don't you draw me a picture while I cook?" While water boiled, Sarah scrolled through apartment listings on her phone, watching her hope evaporate with each impossible requirement. First month, last month, security deposit, credit check, income verification showing rent no more than 30% of gross monthly income. She made $2,400 a month when the medical billing company gave her full hours, which was rare. Most months, she averaged $1,800, which put affordable rent at $540. Nothing in Riverside rented for $540 except rooms in houses with strangers, which Derek's lawyers would use as evidence of instability. The email arrived at 6:47 p.m. while Maya was eating spaghetti and telling an elaborate story about her rabbit's adventures at school. Sarah almost deleted it, assuming spam from the generic law firm name, Whitmore and Associates, Estate Management Division. But something made her open it. Maybe desperation, maybe the universe taking pity. Dear Ms. Sarah Chen, we are attempting to contact you regarding the estate of Margaret Chen Morrison, deceased November 2nd. According to our records, you are listed as sole beneficiary for property holdings requiring immediate attention. Please contact our office within 10 business days to claim inheritance, or assets will be transferred to state custody per Washington statute. Sarah read it 3 times, her heart accelerating with each pass. Margaret Chen Morrison, her grandmother, her father's mother, whom she hadn't seen since she was 12 years old. The family had fractured over something Sarah never fully understood, adult arguments that resulted in her father cutting contact with his own mother, moving the family from Seattle to California, and never looking back. Margaret had sent birthday cards every year until Sarah turned 18, always with handwritten notes and crisp $20 bills. Sarah had written thank you cards religiously, but her father had forbidden further contact, citing unnamed betrayals and broken trust that he refused to explain. Margaret had died, and nobody had told Sarah. The grief hit unexpected and sharp, mourning a grandmother she'd barely known but had always loved from a distance, imagining reconciliation that would never come. But inheritance? Margaret had lived modestly, working as a public school teacher for 40 years. Sarah had assumed whatever assets existed would be minimal, maybe a few $1,000s if she was lucky. The law firm's address was in Seattle. Sarah called the next morning during her break at work, standing in the parking lot with wind cutting through her thin jacket. The receptionist transferred her to an attorney named Robert Whitmore, whose voice carried the careful neutrality of someone delivering news they weren't sure would be received well. Ms. Chen, thank you for responding. I'm sorry for your loss. Your grandmother passed peacefully in her sleep. No pain, which I know doesn't make it easier, but perhaps provides some comfort. I didn't even know she was sick. Sarah's voice cracked despite her intention to stay professional. She wasn't. Not that we're aware. Just age, heart failure, 89 years old. Papers rustled on his end. Regarding the estate, your grandmother left very specific instructions. She owned property in Washington state, approximately 8 acres in the Cascade Range that she wanted you to have. 8 acres. Sarah's mind raced through possibilities. Developable land, maybe sellable, enough to secure an apartment and legal representation for the custody battle. What's the property worth? Whitmore's pause felt heavy with implication. That's complicated. The land itself has been assessed by the county at $12,000, but it's essentially worthless in practical terms. It's located on the slopes of an inactive volcano, zoned for no development, accessible only by Forest Service roads that aren't maintained in winter. Your grandmother purchased in 1978 for $500 through a federal land sale program. Sarah felt hope deflating like a punctured tire. So it's worthless. I wouldn't say worthless, just difficult. There's a structure on the property, a small research station your grandmother built with her late husband in the 1980s. That might have salvage value, but honestly, Ms. Chun, I'm obligated to inform you that accepting this inheritance means accepting responsibility for property taxes, currently $340 annually, and any maintenance required by the county. Why did she leave it to me? Another pause, longer this time. She left a letter. I'm required to read it to you per her instructions. Would you like me to proceed? Sarah sat on the curb, phone pressed to her ear, ignoring the cold seeping through her jeans. Yes. Whitmore cleared his throat, his professional voice softening as he read Margaret's words. My dear Sarah, if you're hearing this, I've passed on, and I hope I managed to do so with some dignity intact. I've thought about you every day since your father took you away. I understood his anger, even if I never agreed with his choice to sever contact. Some family wounds run too deep for simple apologies. I'm leaving you the Volcano property because it's the only thing I have of real value, though nobody else will see it that way. When your grandfather Thomas and I bought that land, people thought we were crazy. Why would 2 teachers spend their savings on frozen rock that can't be farmed or built on? But Thomas was a geologist, and he saw something others missed. The property sits on volcanic terrain that contains geological features of significant scientific interest. We built a small research station there, spent our weekends exploring, documenting, loving every difficult mile of that strange, beautiful place. After Thomas died in 1995, I kept going back, kept exploring, kept discovering. There's something there, Sarah, something extraordinary that I haven't told anyone about, because I learned long ago that some discoveries are dangerous when the wrong people find out. I'm leaving you clues, not answers. If you're brave enough to look, you'll understand why I kept this secret. After November, that area is inaccessible until April. Sarah requested time off from work, citing a family emergency. Her supervisor, a woman named Linda who'd always been kind, approved 3 days without requiring details. Take care of yourself, Sarah. You've been through enough. The drive from Riverside, Oregon to the Cascade Range in Washington took 6 hours through October landscape painted in rust and gold. Sarah left Maya with her friend Jessica, lying that she had job interviews in Seattle, not wanting to admit she was driving into the mountains to inspect worthless inheritance from a grandmother her daughter had never met. The Forest Service road appeared exactly where Whitmore's directions indicated, marked by a weathered sign. FS Road 2409, high clearance vehicles only, not maintained winter. Sarah's 12-year-old Honda Civic protested immediately, suspension groaning over ruts and rocks, but she continued, climbing switchbacks that revealed increasingly dramatic views of the surrounding peaks. The volcano dominated the landscape, a massive presence that should have been intimidating but somehow felt peaceful. Unlike the sharp peaks surrounding it, this mountain had gentle slopes, its summit rounded and white with early snow. The research station appeared after 2 miles of rough road, a small structure built from salvaged materials and determination, sitting at the edge of a clearing where volcanic rock broke through the soil like bones through skin. Should I continue to complete Part 1 to 7,000 words, or would you like to review this opening section first? Continue with Part 1. 3:23 p.m. Sarah parked beside the research station, engine ticking as it cooled in the thin mountain air. The silence was absolute. No traffic sounds, no human voices, just wind moving through Douglas firs and the distant cry of a hawk circling overhead. The building was smaller than she'd imagined, maybe 20 feet by 30, constructed from corrugated metal and rough-cut lumber that had weathered to silver gray. Solar panels lined the roof, surprisingly modern against the rustic structure. A propane tank sat beside the entrance, and a small generator was housed under a protective tarp. The door was locked, but Whitmore had sent the key, an old brass piece with Margaret's initials engraved on the handle. It turned smoothly, suggesting recent use, and the door swung inward on hinges that barely creaked. Inside smelled like dust, and old paper, and something Sarah couldn't immediately identify, mineral and sharp, like stone exposed to air for the first time. The main room contained a workbench covered in geological samples, rocks of every color and texture arranged with careful labels. A desk sat beneath the window, facing the volcano, covered in notebooks and survey maps held down by specimens that caught the light strangely. Margaret had lived simply. A cot with military-grade blankets, a camping stove, shelves lined with freeze-dried meals, and bottled water. No television, no computer, just books on geology and mineralogy and volcanic formations. A woman who'd chosen knowledge over comfort, discovery over convenience. The green filing cabinet stood against the back wall, exactly where Margaret's letter had indicated. Sarah opened the top drawer and found survey maps, dozens of them, covering the property in meticulous detail. Her grandfather's handwriting annotated features: basalt, formation 1.2 million years old, obsidian deposit, minimal quality, thermal vent, inactive since Pleistocene, epoch. But it was Margaret's handwriting that caught Sarah's attention, newer notes in different colored ink, dated progressively from 1995 through this year. She continued surveying after Thomas died, mapping the property with increasing focus on one specific area marked repeatedly. North Face anomaly. Requires further investigation. Sarah spread the maps across the workbench, trying to understand what she was looking at. The volcano's north face showed a series of caves or tunnels, natural formations created by ancient lava flows. Margaret had explored them systematically, documenting dimensions and features with scientific precision. One map had a sticky note attached in Margaret's handwriting. "Sarah, if you're reading this, start here. Cave entrance coordinates: 46.2847 degrees north, 121.7392 degrees west. Bring headlamp, rope, warm clothes. Trust me." Sarah checked her phone. No signal, which made sense this deep in the mountains. She'd brought camping supplies, anticipating she might need to stay overnight, but exploring caves alone felt reckless, possibly suicidal. But Margaret's voice echoed from the letter Whitmore had read. "If you're brave enough to look, you'll understand why I kept this secret." Sarah spent the rest of daylight preparing, inventorying the supplies Margaret had left. The research station was better equipped than it appeared, with climbing gear hanging on wall pegs, multiple headlamps with fresh batteries, coils of rope rated for serious mountaineering, first aid supplies, emergency blankets, even a satellite phone for emergencies. Her grandmother had been prepared for something, had been working towards something specific, had known she might not live to see it completed, and had left everything Sarah would need to continue. The notebooks on the desk documented Margaret's progression. Early entries from 1995 focused on grief, on missing Thomas, on coming to the mountain because she couldn't stand being in the house they'd shared for 43 years. But gradually, the entries shifted from emotional processing to scientific observation. May 3, 1996, discovered thermal anomaly on North Face. Ground temperature 15 degrees higher than surrounding area, despite no visible venting. Thomas would have loved this puzzle. September 12, 1998. Cave system more extensive than initial survey suggested. Mapped 3 chambers, each showing unusual mineral deposits. Sending samples to university lab under anonymous submission. January 4, 2001. Lab results confirmed. Mineral composition doesn't match known volcanic formations in this region. Possible deep source material brought up during historical eruptions. Requires further investigation, but I'm proceeding cautiously. Don't want attention until I understand what this means. The entries became more cryptic after that, as if Margaret had become aware that someone might read her notebooks and decided to obscure her findings. March 15, 2003. Made significant discovery. Not recording details here. Survey map 23B shows location. Taking precautions. August 8, 2007. Contacted mineralogist friend from university days. His reaction confirmed my suspicions. This changes everything, but I need to be smart about next steps. June 19, 2015. Almost told Sarah's father. Decided against it. He tried to claim it. Turned into something commercial and ugly. This needs to stay protected until the right person finds it. Until Sarah finds it. Sarah read that entry 3 times, feeling the weight of her grandmother's trust. Margaret had known, somehow, that Sarah would need this, that she'd be desperate enough to accept worthless land and brave enough to follow breadcrumbs into a frozen volcano. Night fell fast in the mountains. Sarah heated freeze-dried soup on the camping stove, ate mechanically while studying survey map 23B by headlamp. The North Face cave entrance was marked clearly, about a quarter-mile from the research station, accessible via a trail Margaret had marked with cairns. She should wait until morning. Exploring caves at night was dangerous and stupid. But Derek's text message kept surfacing in her thoughts. "Maya can stay with me full-time. You need to get your life together." Sarah couldn't get her life together working for $2,400 a month and living in apartments she'd be evicted from. She couldn't compete with Derek's pharmaceutical sales income and his new wife's dual income and their suburban house with a yard and their ability to provide everything Sarah couldn't. Unless Margaret had left her something that changed the equation. Unless there was something on this frozen volcano that made accepting worthless inheritance the smartest decision she'd ever made. Sarah packed a backpack with supplies, strapped a headlamp to her forehead, clipped rope and carabiners to her belt, and stepped into October darkness that felt absolute. The trail Margaret had marked was visible even by headlamp, cairns of stacked stones every 20 yards, leading north toward the volcano's face. The temperature dropped as she climbed, her breath forming clouds that dissipated in the beam of light cutting through darkness. The forest thinned, giving way to volcanic rock and scattered vegetation clinging to shallow soil. The cave entrance appeared exactly where the coordinates indicated, a dark opening in the mountain's face about 6 feet high and 4 feet wide, exhaling cold air that smelled of minerals and time. Sarah stood at the threshold, rational fear warring with desperate hope. She thought about Maya, about losing her daughter to a man who'd betrayed their family, about the eviction notice and medical bills, and the grinding mathematics of poverty that would never add up to anything better than survival. She thought about Margaret, 89 years old, climbing this mountain alone, exploring caves in pursuit of something she'd kept secret for decades. "Trust me," Margaret had written. So Sarah stepped inside. The cave narrowed immediately, forcing her to crouch, her headlamp illuminating walls of basalt that showed the flow patterns of ancient lava. The air was cold but not freezing, surprisingly dry. The stone beneath her boots, smooth from millennia of geological processes she barely understood. 20 feet in, the tunnel widened into a chamber large enough to stand in. Sarah straightened, sweeping her headlamp across walls that glittered strangely in the light. Not quartz, which she'd expected, but something darker, with facets that caught and reflected her beam like hundreds of tiny mirrors. She moved closer, touched the wall, felt the cold hardness of stone that seemed to have been cut or shaped, though that was impossible. Natural caves didn't have geometric patterns. Natural formations didn't create walls that looked almost faceted. Margaret's voice echoed from one of the later notebook entries. The chambers show evidence of crystalline formations inconsistent with typical volcanic processes. I believe we're seeing the results of unique conditions during the volcano's active period, possibly exposure to extreme pressure and temperature that created something extraordinary. Sarah continued deeper, following Margaret's trail markers, small arrows painted on stone in fluorescent orange that glowed under her headlamp. The cave system branched multiple times, but the markers made navigation simple, leading her systematically downward into the volcano's interior. The second chamber was larger, cathedral-like in its proportions, with a ceiling that disappeared beyond the reach of her light. The walls here showed the glittering even more dramatically, entire surfaces covered in whatever mineral Margaret had been documenting. Sarah approached the nearest wall, examining the formations closely. Not quartz, not obsidian, something that looked almost gem-like in its clarity and the way it refracted light, creating rainbow halos around her headlamp beam. She pulled out her phone, tried to take a photograph despite having no signal, needing to document what she was seeing. The camera struggled with the lighting, but when she reviewed the image, the wall looked almost blood-red through the lens, darker than it appeared to her naked eye, but unmistakably beautiful. The third chamber nearly made her turn back. The tunnel leading to it narrowed to the point where Sarah had to crawl on her stomach, rope dragging behind her, headlamp scraping against stone ceiling just inches above her skull. Claustrophobia clawed at her throat, and she almost retreated, almost decided this wasn't worth suffocating in a mountain. But Margaret had made this journey in her 70s and 80s, had crawled through this passage alone, motivated by something stronger than fear. Sarah kept moving, focusing on breath and progress, until the tunnel opened suddenly into space that made her gasp. The chamber was immense, at least 50 feet across, with walls that rose in smooth curves toward a ceiling lost in darkness. But it wasn't the size that stole Sarah's breath. It was the walls themselves, covered floor to ceiling in crystalline formations that her headlamp revealed in stunning clarity. They weren't just glittering. They were glowing, deep crimson that seemed to come from within the stone itself, like embers banked beneath the surface. The chamber looked like the interior of a massive geode, every surface covered in hexagonal crystals ranging from thumbnail size to formations as large as Sarah's fist. She approached the nearest wall, reached out with trembling fingers, touched what she'd traveled 6 hours, and risked her life to find. The crystal was cold, harder than anything she'd ever felt, with edges sharp enough to draw blood if she pressed too hard. Sarah pulled out a small geology hammer from her pack, something she'd found in the research station and brought on instinct. She positioned it carefully against a crystal about 2 inches long, tapped gently, then harder, watching for the fracture line that would let her remove a sample. The crystal broke free, cleanly, falling into her gloved palm with surprising weight. In her headlamp beam, it looked like a drop of frozen blood, perfectly formed, with internal fractures that caught light and scattered it in patterns that seemed almost structured. Margaret's most recent notebook entry had been dated just 2 weeks before her death. Sample analysis from independent gemologists confirms what I've suspected for 15 years. These aren't just minerals. They're corundum crystals with chrome impurities that create red coloration. In layman's terms, rubies. Natural, gem-quality rubies in formations I've never seen documented anywhere in North America. Conservative estimate based on visible surface area, $500 to $600 million in extractable stones, possibly more in deeper chambers I haven't accessed. $600 million. The number was so large it became meaningless, abstract, the kind of wealth that existed in news articles about lottery winners and tech billionaires, not in the hands of single mothers facing eviction. Sarah sat on the cave floor, holding a ruby that might be worth thousands of dollars, surrounded by formations that represented more money than she could conceptualize, and felt something crack inside her chest. Margaret had known, had documented everything, had kept it secret for 15 years because she understood that discovery would bring attention, that attention would bring exploitation, that exploitation would destroy the very thing that made this place extraordinary. And she'd left it to Sarah, not because she needed money, though Margaret had certainly understood that need, but because she wanted someone who would understand the responsibility that came with this discovery. The letter's final lines echoed in her memory. Remember that value isn't always what society says it is. Make this count. Sarah remained in the chamber for an hour, documenting everything with her phone's camera despite the lack of signal, taking measurements, collecting samples of different crystal sizes, trying to approach this discovery with Margaret's scientific mindset rather than drowning in the financial implications. The walls showed multiple generations of crystal growth, suggesting the formations had developed over millennia, perhaps even longer. The chamber itself was probably part of an ancient magma chamber, now frozen and filled with the perfect conditions for corundum crystallization. High pressure, high temperature during formation, the right mineral composition, geological time measured in epochs rather than human lifespans. This wasn't just wealth. It was geological history, scientific significance, the kind of discovery that should be studied and protected, not strip-mined and sold to the highest bidder. But Sarah also thought about Maya, about custody battles and eviction notices, and the mathematics of poverty that made good parenting almost impossible when you couldn't afford stability. She thought about Derek's smug certainty that money made him the better parent, that his ability to provide material comfort entitled him to their daughter. She thought about fighting back with resources that matched his, about securing her daughter's future, about proving that love and determination could triumph over wealth and lawyers when you finally had the means to compete. The return journey through the narrow passage felt easier, or maybe Sarah was just too overwhelmed to process fear properly. She emerged from the cave into night air that felt warm compared to the stone interior, her pack heavier with ruby samples that might be worth more than she'd earn in her entire lifetime. The research station offered shelter and silence. Sarah spread the samples across Margaret's workbench, studying them under better light, trying to understand what she'd inherited beyond abstract dollar amounts. The rubies ranged in quality. Some were deeply flawed, internal fractures visible even to her untrained eye, probably worth modest amounts to collectors or industrial applications. But others were clear, with that deep crimson color that even Sarah recognized as exceptional, the kind of stones that appeared in museum collections and auction catalogs. Margaret's notebooks documented her research methodically. She'd sent anonymous samples to 3 independent gemologists over the years, receiving consistent assessments. Natural rubies of exceptional quality, likely from volcanic formation, comparable to stones from Myanmar or Madagascar, but with unique characteristics that suggested a previously unknown deposit. One gemologist's letter from 2018 was tucked between notebook pages. The samples you sent represent some of the finest natural rubies I've examined in 40 years of professional practice. The clarity and color saturation are museum grade. If you're willing to disclose the source, I'd be interested in discussing acquisition or partnership arrangements. These stones could transform the colored gemstone market. Margaret had never responded, had kept mining samples, documenting formations, protecting the secret until she could pass it to someone she trusted to handle it responsibly. Sarah's phone showed 11:47 p.m. No signal, no connection to the outside world. Just her and a frozen volcano and enough wealth to solve every problem she'd ever faced or create entirely new categories of problems she couldn't yet imagine. She should sleep, should approach this with a clear head in the morning, should think carefully about next steps before making decisions that couldn't be unmade. But exhaustion and overwhelm made sleep impossible. Sarah lit the camping stove, made terrible instant coffee, sat at Margaret's desk, facing the window, where dawn would eventually arrive, and tried to process the reality of her situation. She owned 8 acres of volcanic terrain containing ruby deposits worth potentially $594 million. Based on Margaret's conservative calculations and updated market value Sarah had researched during her drive up the mountain. The land was zoned for no development, which meant commercial mining would require county approval, environmental assessments, legal battles that would take years and cost millions. But the rubies were already there, already formed, already accessible through caves that Margaret had mapped exhaustively. Extracting them wouldn't require industrial mining, just careful, systematic collection from formations that had been growing for millennia and showed no signs of instability. Sarah could take what she needed, leave the rest, protect the site from exploitation while securing her daughter's future. She could do this quietly, carefully, the way Margaret had conducted her research for 15 years without anyone knowing what existed beneath this frozen volcano. Or she could go public, bring in partners and experts, do everything legally and transparently, and risk losing control to lawyers and developers and people who'd see only dollar signs where Margaret had seen geological wonder. The choice felt impossible. Weighted with implications Sarah wasn't equipped to understand at midnight in a research station with no phone signal and no one to consult except her own desperate instincts. Dawn arrived slowly, gray light creeping across the volcanic landscape, revealing the mountain in detail Sarah had missed during her nighttime arrival. The volcano dominated everything, its slopes gentle but massive, its presence both peaceful and vaguely threatening. A sleeping giant that had been quiet for thousands of years but might not stay quiet forever. Sarah heated freeze-dried eggs, ate without tasting, made more coffee from Margaret's dwindling supply, and tried to think strategically about problems that kept multiplying faster than solutions appeared. Problem 1. She needed money immediately, not years from now after legal battles and environmental assessments. The eviction gave her 69 days remaining, and Derek's custody petition hearing was scheduled for December 15th, just 6 weeks away. Problem 2. Selling rubies without disclosing their source would be difficult and potentially illegal, depending on how she approached it. Gemstone dealers asked questions, documented origins, reported suspicious transactions to prevent money laundering and illegal mining. Problem 3. Even if she successfully sold rubies without raising suspicion, sudden wealth would trigger Derek's lawyers immediately. They'd demand accounting of income sources, investigate inheritance claims, possibly challenge the legitimacy of the volcanic property and its contents. Problem 4. Going public with the discovery would bring attention Margaret had specifically wanted to avoid. Media coverage, mining companies, geological surveys, environmental protection agencies, all descending on this quiet mountainside and transforming it into something commercial and exploited. Sarah stared at Margaret's notebooks, at 15 years of careful documentation, at a woman who'd chosen scientific integrity over personal gain, who'd protected this discovery at the cost of dying alone and poor, leaving behind only knowledge and trust that someone would handle it better than she could. The answer came not from strategic thinking, but from Margaret's own methods. She conducted research anonymously, sent samples without disclosing sources, learned everything she needed to know without revealing what she'd found. Sarah could do the same, but in reverse. Instead of researching the rubies, she'd sell them through channels that value discretion over documentation, that catered to collectors who asked fewer questions and paid premium prices for exceptional stones with mysterious origins. The criminal gemstone market existed. Sarah knew from true crime podcasts she'd listened to during her commute. But she didn't need criminal channels, just private ones, collectors who bought stones at auction or through exclusive dealers who understood that not every seller wanted publicity. She'd start small, test the market with a single exceptional ruby, establish value and demand before committing to larger sales. She'd use the money to solve immediate problems, eviction and custody battles and medical bills, then reassess from a position of stability rather than desperation. And she'd protect the site, keep Margaret's secret, ensure that whatever happened next honored the trust her grandmother had placed in her. The plan felt fragile, but possible. Sarah spent the morning photographing the research station, documenting Margaret's notes and maps, transferring everything to her phone despite the lack of signal. When she returned to civilization, she'd upload everything to cloud storage, create backups, ensure the knowledge survived even if something happened to her. She selected 3 rubies from her samples, ranging from excellent to exceptional quality, each stone roughly 1 carat in weight. Based on Margaret's research and online pricing she'd reviewed before losing signal, these 3 stones alone might be worth $30,000 to $75,000, depending on buyer and market conditions. Enough to solve the immediate crisis. Enough to buy time for the longer battle. Sarah locked the research station carefully, started the Honda's engine with whispered prayer that it would survive the Forest Service road in reverse, and began the descent from the frozen volcano that had just become the most valuable thing she'd ever owned. The drive back to Riverside felt surreal. Her mind split between practical concerns about selling rubies and abstract wonder about geological processes that created wealth from pressure and time. The rubies sat in her jacket pocket, wrapped in tissue paper from Margaret's research station, each stone representing possibilities Sarah barely dared to imagine. By the time she crossed into Oregon, phone signal had returned in bursts, and messages flooded in with the particular cruelty of modern communication. Derek's lawyer had sent formal notice. Custody modification hearing moved up to November 20th due to emergency circumstances regarding the child's welfare. Translation: they'd heard about the eviction and were striking while Sarah was vulnerable. Jessica had texted 6 times, increasingly worried about Maya, who'd been crying at bedtime and asking when Mommy was coming home. Linda from work wanted to know if Sarah could cover weekend shifts because someone had quit without notice and they were desperate. The medical billing company for Maya's emergency room visit had sent collection notices threatening to report unpaid debt to credit agencies. Sarah pulled into a rest stop, hands shaking too hard to drive safely, and made the call she'd been rehearsing since dawn. Whitmore and Associates. How may I direct your call? Robert Whitmore, please. This is Sarah Chen regarding the Morrison estate. He answered within seconds, professional concern evident in his greeting. Ms. Chen, did you make it to the property safely? I was worried about you attempting that road alone. I'm fine. I saw the research station, and I understand now what my grandmother wanted me to find. Sarah paused, choosing her words carefully. I need help with something, and I'll pay whatever your rate is, but this needs to stay confidential. Completely confidential. Attorney-client privilege applies to all estate matters. What do you need? I need to sell something without documenting its source, at least not publicly. I need to find buyers who value discretion and pay fair market value. And I need it done quickly, before mid-November. The silence lasted long enough that Sarah worried he'd hung up. Then Whitmore's voice returned, quieter now, stripped of professional distance. Your grandmother called me 3 months ago. She said if you contacted me about selling something after visiting the property, I should help you without asking questions. She said I'd understand when the time came that this was important, that you'd need guidance but also trust. He exhaled audibly. I don't know what you found up there, Ms. Chen, but Margaret was one of the most honest people I ever represented. If she trusted you with this, then I'll help however I can. Sarah felt tears threatening again, grief and gratitude tangling into something she couldn't quite name. I have 3 gemstones. They're from the volcanic property, legally mine as inherited assets, but I need to sell them without triggering attention from my ex-husband's lawyers or anyone else who might use the information against me in court. Understood. I have contacts in the estate jewelry trade, private collectors who buy from families liquidating inheritances. They pay fair prices and handle transactions discreetly. Can you bring the stones to my office tomorrow? I'll need to see them to make appropriate introductions. They arranged a meeting for 9 a.m. Sarah retrieved Maya from Jessica's house, holding her daughter tight enough to make her squirm, breathing in her strawberry shampoo, and feeling the absolute certainty that she was doing the right thing, that Margaret's gift would save them both. That night, after Maya fell asleep, clutching her rabbit, Sarah sat at her small kitchen table and examined the 3 rubies under the harsh fluorescent light. They looked less impressive here than in the cave, smaller somehow, their crimson color muted by artificial lighting. But Sarah had done enough research to know that natural rubies of any significant quality were rare, that the market valued them higher than nearly any other colored gemstone, that these 3 stones might be her salvation. She thought about Margaret, about dying alone at 89 with wealth beyond measure beneath her feet, choosing protection of a geological wonder over personal comfort, trusting that someday someone would find what she'd left behind and understand why it mattered. Sarah understood, not just the monetary value, though that was staggering and necessary, but the deeper significance of discoveries that changed lives, of legacies that transcended death, of grandmothers who loved granddaughters they barely knew enough to leave them frozen volcanoes filled with rubies and hope. Whitmore's office occupied the 3rd floor of a building in downtown Seattle that had witnessed the city's transformation from timber town to tech capital. The waiting room smelled like old leather and furniture polish, decorated with photographs of the Puget Sound waterfront from various decades, a visual timeline of progress and change. Sarah arrived 15 minutes early, Maya beside her, because she'd had no choice but to bring her daughter to what might be the most important meeting of their lives. Jessica had offered to watch her again, but Sarah sensed she'd exhausted her friend's goodwill, that you could only ask so many favors before the asking became burden. Maya sat quietly with a library book, sounding out words under her breath, while Sarah clutched her purse, containing 3 rubies wrapped in tissue paper and all the hope she could muster. Whitmore emerged precisely at 9, extending his hand with the firm grip of someone who understood the importance of first impressions. He was maybe 60, with steel-gray hair and the kind of calm demeanor that came from decades of managing other people's crises without adopting their panic. Ms. Chen, thank you for coming. And who's this? My daughter Maya. I apologize for bringing her, but no apology necessary. I have a daughter myself, grown now, but I remember those years when childcare was a daily negotiation. He smiled at Maya. There's a play area in the conference room with books and puzzles. Would that be okay? Maya looked to Sarah for permission, then nodded shyly. They followed Whitmore down a hallway lined with law books and framed certificates, entering a conference room that managed to be both professional and welcoming, with large windows overlooking Elliott Bay and a corner dedicated to entertaining young visitors. Once Maya was occupied with a puzzle depicting the Seattle skyline, Whitmore closed the door and his demeanor shifted slightly, professional curiosity replacing social pleasantry. May I see what you brought? Sarah unwrapped the rubies carefully, placing them on the polished mahogany table where they caught morning light and scattered it in crimson patterns across the wood. Whitmore produced a jeweler's loupe from his desk drawer, examining each stone with the methodical attention of someone who knew what he was looking at. The silence stretched long enough to make Sarah nervous. Finally, Whitmore set down the loop and met her eyes with an expression that contained surprise and something approaching concern. "Miss Chen, I need to ask you directly, are these stones legally yours? Because what I'm looking at represents significant value, the kind that attracts questions. They came from my grandmother's property, 8 acres in the Cascade Range that she left to me. Everything on that property is legally mine according to the deed transfer you processed. And you're certain these are natural rubies, not synthetic or treated?" Sarah pulled out her phone, showed him photographs of the cave chamber, of the formations covering the walls, of Margaret's notebooks documenting 15 years of research. "My grandmother was a geology teacher. Her husband was a geologist. They discovered these formations decades ago and kept them secret. She left me documentation of everything, survey maps, sample analyses from independent gemologists. It's all legal, all documented, all mine." Whitmore studied the photographs with increasing interest, occasionally zooming in on details, his lawyer's mind clearly processing implications and complications Sarah probably hadn't considered. "The largest stone here is approximately 1.2 carats, exceptional clarity, color saturation that I describe as pigeon blood, which is the most valuable hue for rubies. Based on current market values for natural rubies of this quality, I'd estimate $25,000 to $35,000 for that stone alone." Sarah's breath caught. "And the others?" "The middle stone, slightly smaller but similar quality, perhaps $18,000 to $25,000. The smallest has visible inclusions that reduce value somewhat, but still gem grade, maybe $8,000 to $12,000. He looked up from the stones. "Together, you're looking at $51,000 to $72,000, depending on buyer and market conditions." The numbers felt fictional, too large to connect to the small crimson stones sitting on expensive wood. Sarah thought about her checking account balance. For $112 after paying what she could toward the electric bill, about the eviction notice giving her 66 days remaining, about custody battles that would determine Maya's future. "I need to sell them quickly, before November 20th. That's when my custody hearing is scheduled." Whitmore nodded slowly, understanding crystallizing in his expression. "Your ex-husband is challenging custody, and you need resources to fight back. But selling valuable assets during active custody litigation creates complications. His lawyers will demand accounting of income sources, and sudden wealth raises suspicion of hidden assets or illegal activity. So I'm trapped. I have wealth, but I can't access it without losing my daughter." Sarah heard her voice crack, felt the familiar pressure of tears she'd been holding back since the eviction notice arrived. "Not trapped, just constrained. We need to be strategic." Whitmore made notes on a legal pad, his handwriting precise and economical. "I have a client, a private collector who specializes in estate jewelry and loose stones. He asks minimal questions, pays fair prices, and structures transactions to minimize paper trails. He's legitimate, not criminal, just values privacy for himself and his sellers. Can you contact him?" "I already did, this morning before you arrived. He's available this afternoon if you're comfortable meeting him. His name is Thomas Wei, second-generation jeweler, family business based in Seattle's International District. His father started buying estate pieces in the 1970s, and Thomas continued the tradition. He's trustworthy within the boundaries of what trustworthy means in his industry." Sarah glanced at Maya, absorbed in her puzzle, oblivious to the conversation determining her future. "What boundaries?" "He'll buy your stones without requiring provenance documentation beyond your word that they're legally yours. He'll pay fair market value, but slightly below retail because he's assuming risk by not verifying source. And he'll conduct the transaction in cash or wire transfer to an account of your choosing, with minimal documentation that could be subpoenaed by your ex-husband's attorneys." "That sounds illegal." "It's not. Gray area, perhaps, but not illegal. Estate sales happen constantly, with limited documentation. Thomas operates within the law while maximizing discretion for clients who need it. Your grandmother understood this, which is why she told me to connect you with appropriate resources." Sarah thought about Margaret, about a woman who'd kept geological secrets for 15 years, who'd understood that some discoveries required protection from publicity and exploitation. She'd known Sarah would need guidance navigating these gray areas, had arranged help even after death. Set up the meeting. I'll go. Thomas Way's shop occupied a narrow storefront in Seattle's International District, wedged between a dim sum restaurant and a shop selling lucky bamboo and jade bracelets. The windows displayed estate jewelry arranged with artistic precision, pieces from various eras suggesting family histories and broken promises, love affairs that ended and inheritances liquidated by descendants who needed money more than sentiment. Sarah and Maya entered to the sound of a bell above the door. The interior surprisingly spacious, extending back into shadows where glass cases held more valuable pieces under carefully calibrated lighting. The air smelled like polish and old velvet, the scent of expensive things waiting to be wanted again. Thomas emerged from the back room, younger than Sarah expected, maybe 40, with the careful movements of someone accustomed to handling delicate objects. He smiled at Maya first, understanding instinctively that winning the child's trust mattered to the mother. "Welcome," Robert called ahead. "You must be Sarah and Maya." His accent carried traces of his father's generation, English shaped by Cantonese inflections that softened consonants and added musicality to his speech. "Maya, I have a box of polished stones behind the counter that I use for sorting. Would you like to help me organize them by color?" Maya looked to Sarah for permission, received a nod, and followed Thomas to a cushioned stool, where he produced a wooden box containing tumbled stones in every color, safe for small hands, engaging enough to occupy her attention while adults conducted business. Once Maya was settled, Thomas gestured Sarah toward a private consultation room, a small space with a desk, professional lighting, and tools of his trade arranged with care. Robert explained your situation in general terms. Custody battle, need for discretion, timeline pressure. I want you to know I take these situations seriously. Family law can be brutal, especially for mothers without resources. Sarah unwrapped the rubies, placed them on the velvet mat Thomas had prepared. He examined them under magnification, using tools Sarah didn't recognize, occasionally making soft sounds of appreciation that suggested genuine interest beyond commercial assessment. Natural rubies of this quality are increasingly rare. The market has been flooded with synthetic and treated stones, which makes verified natural rubies extraordinarily valuable to collectors. He set down his loupe, met Sarah's eyes directly. "These are exceptional. Where did they come from?" "Inherited property. Volcanic formation in the Cascades. My grandmother discovered them decades ago and left me documentation of the deposit. And there are more where these came from?" Sarah hesitated, weighing trust against caution. "Yes, potentially significant quantities. But I'm only selling what I need right now, nothing more." Thomas nodded, understanding the subtext. Smart. Flooding the market devalues individual stones and attracts unwanted attention. Small quantities maintain rarity premium. He made notes on an appraisal form, his handwriting mixing English and Chinese characters. "I can offer you $62,000 for all 3 stones. Payment via wire transfer to an account of your choosing. Transaction completed today." The number hit Sarah like physical force. More than she'd expected, more than she'd dared hope for, enough to solve immediate problems and buy time for longer battles. "Robert said you pay fair market value, slightly below retail. Your offer seems higher than his estimate." Robert is conservative in his assessments, which makes him a good lawyer. "I'm offering fair market value because these stones are exceptional and I have buyers who'll pay premium prices for natural rubies with interesting provenance. The volcanic formation story adds value to collectors who appreciate geological rarity. But you won't document the source publicly? I'll document that they came from an estate sale, inherited property, legally acquired by the seller. That's sufficient for my records and my buyer's satisfaction. The specific location remains private unless you choose to disclose it, which I recommend against until you've consulted with lawyers and tax advisors about how to handle discovery of this magnitude." Discovery of this magnitude. Thomas understood what Sarah barely dared to acknowledge, that 3 stones represented a fraction of the volcanic chamber's contents, that this transaction was the beginning of something that could transform her life or destroy it, depending on how carefully she proceeded. "I accept your offer." Thomas produced paperwork, surprisingly straightforward for a transaction of this size. Sarah signed as seller, confirmed her banking information for wire transfer, received a receipt documenting purchase of 3 natural ruby specimens from estate property, origin, Cascade Range, Washington. "The transfer will complete within 2 hours. I'll text confirmation when funds are available in your account." Thomas wrapped the rubies carefully, placing them in a safe behind a painting of a Chinese landscape. "One more thing, Sarah. Whatever you found up there, whatever your grandmother left you, be very careful who you tell. Significant mineral discoveries attract attention from people with resources to take what you have legally or otherwise. Protect yourself and your daughter first, then worry about everything else." Sarah thanked him, collected Maya from her stone sorting project, and emerged into afternoon sunlight, feeling simultaneously elated and terrified. $62,000 would solve the eviction crisis, hire a better lawyer for the custody battle, cover medical bills, and create a buffer against the constant financial emergencies that had defined her life since the divorce. But it was also evidence of her access to wealth that Derek's lawyers would demand she explain, evidence of sudden income that could be portrayed as suspicious or hidden assets, evidence that might actually hurt her custody case if handled wrong. She needed a lawyer, not just for family court, but for everything else this discovery represented. She needed tax advice, property law expertise, mining regulations knowledge, environmental protection guidance. She needed help from people who could navigate gray areas without drowning in them. The phone buzzed while she was buckling Maya into the car seat. Thomas Way's name appeared with a text message. "Wire transfer complete. $62,000 deposited to account ending in 4892. Good luck with everything." Sarah stared at her banking app, watching the balance update in real time. Numbers climbing from $412 to $62,412. Transformation that felt like magic or theft, like she'd cheated reality by finding rubies in a frozen volcano instead of earning money through conventional struggle. Maya's voice interrupted her thoughts. "Mommy, did we get rich?" "We're not rich, baby. We're just not poor anymore." Sarah started the engine, pulling into Seattle traffic while her mind raced through calculations and strategies. "We're going to be okay." The drive back to Riverside took 6 hours through October landscape that seemed different now, less threatening, more navigable, as if financial security had changed the fundamental nature of the world she moved through. Sarah used the driving time to think, to plan, to begin organizing her approach to problems that suddenly seemed solvable. First priority, housing. She needed to move quickly, secure an apartment or rental house that Derek's lawyers couldn't criticize, something safe and clean and appropriate for raising a 7-year-old. The eviction on her record would complicate applications, but landlords sometimes overlooked past problems when tenants could pay 6 months rent up front in cash. Second priority, legal representation. Whitmore practiced estate law, not family court, but he might have referrals to attorneys who specialized in custody battles and understood how to protect clients with unexpected income from looking suspicious. Third priority, protecting the volcanic property and its contents. She needed to understand her legal rights, her obligations to report mineral discoveries, her options for commercial extraction versus personal collection, her exposure to claims from the county or state or federal government. Fourth priority, and somehow most important, protecting Maya from the emotional chaos that would accompany these changes. A 7-year-old didn't need to know about rubies and custody battles and the machinery of adult conflict. She needed stability and love and the sense that her mother had everything under control, even when control felt like beautiful fiction. Sarah's phone rang through the car's Bluetooth system. The number showed Riverside area code, but no name, probably a spam call, but she answered anyway out of habit. Sarah Chen. The voice was male, professional, vaguely familiar. Speaking. "This is Officer Marcus Rodriguez with Riverside Police Department. We met briefly last month when you filed a report about your ex-husband violating custody terms. I'm calling because we received a concerning report I thought you should know about. Sarah's chest tightened. Maya was in the back seat humming to herself, oblivious to the conversation. What kind of report? Your ex-husband filed a complaint alleging you've been neglecting your daughter, leaving her with inadequate supervision, possibly engaging in illegal activity to generate unreported income. He's requesting a welfare check at your address. The timing was too perfect to be coincidence. Derek somehow knew about the Seattle trip, about Thomas Way, about money that had appeared in her account. But how? She'd been careful, discreet, told no one except Whitmore and Thomas, neither of whom had any reason to contact Derek. Unless someone was watching her. Unless Derek had hired someone to monitor her movements, track her finances, document everything she did in preparation for the custody hearing. Officer Rodriguez, I need to be very clear. I have not neglected my daughter. She was with a friend while I conducted estate business in Seattle related to my grandmother's recent death. I have not engaged in illegal activity. My income is from legally inherited property that I'm liquidating through proper channels. This is harassment from my ex-husband designed to intimidate me before our custody hearing. I believe you, Ms. Chen. Your record shows no history of neglect or criminal activity. But I'm obligated to conduct a welfare check per department protocol. I can schedule at your convenience, make it as non-intrusive as possible, or I can show up unannounced, which is more disruptive. Your choice. Sarah thought quickly, weighing options and implications. Refusing the check would look suspicious and give Derek ammunition. Allowing it immediately might catch her off guard if her apartment was messy or if Maya said something innocent that could be misinterpreted. But scheduling it gave her time to prepare, to clean, to coach Maya gently on what to expect. Tomorrow morning, 10 a.m. Is that acceptable? Perfect. I'll note in my report that you were cooperative and proactive. For what it's worth, Ms. Chen, I see these custody conflicts constantly. Usually it's the parent with more resources trying to intimidate the parent with fewer resources. Doesn't mean they're better at parenting, just better at hiring lawyers. After hanging up, Sarah gripped the steering wheel tight enough to hurt, feeling rage and fear compete for dominance. Derek was escalating, using police resources and legal intimidation to maintain control, to punish her for daring to fight back, to ensure she remained desperate and vulnerable. But Sarah wasn't desperate anymore, not the same way. $62,000 bought breathing room and legal representation and the ability to fight back with resources that matched Derek's, at least partially. She called Whitmore the moment she arrived home, Maya already running inside to use the bathroom and check on her fish tank. Robert, I need a referral for a family law attorney. Someone aggressive, someone familiar with custody battles where one parent uses wealth as weapon, someone available immediately because this situation is escalating fast. I know just a person. Jennifer Park, practices in Portland, specializes in exactly these cases, represents mothers navigating divorce and custody with high-conflict ex-spouses. She's expensive, but she's worth it. Cost isn't a concern anymore. Can you send me her contact information? A pause. Then Whitmore's voice dropped to something more personal. Sarah, I'm going to give you advice that's outside my professional responsibility, but matters anyway. Whatever happened in Seattle today, whatever resources you now have access to, protect that information carefully. Financial discovery in custody cases is invasive and ruthless. Derek's lawyers will demand accounting of every dollar, and sudden wealth without clear documentation raises suspicions you don't need. I have documentation. The estate transfer, the property deed, the sale of inherited assets. You have documentation that raises more questions than it answers. Where did the assets come from? What's their total value? Why sell now? Why privately instead of through public auction? Your ex-husband's attorneys will paint this as suspicious, possibly criminal, definitely evidence of hidden assets you're trying to protect from equitable distribution. Sarah sank onto the couch, watching Maya feed her fish with careful precision, measuring food exactly as Sarah had taught her, following rules because rules made the world feel safer when everything else was chaos. So what do? Get ahead of the narrative. Jennifer can help you structure the financial disclosure properly, Establish that you've inherited property of unknown value that you're liquidating carefully to preserve market value. You're not hiding wealth, you're managing it responsibly. That's the story you need documented before Derek's lawyers start crafting their version. They talked for another 15 minutes, Whitmore walking her through strategies and considerations Sarah hadn't even contemplated. By the end, she had Jennifer Park's contact information, an appointment scheduled for Friday morning, and instructions to document everything related to the volcanic property and its contents. The welfare check the next morning was exactly as invasive and humiliating as Sarah had anticipated. Officer Rodriguez was professional and kind, but he still had to inspect every room, check Maya's sleeping arrangements, look inside the refrigerator to verify adequate food, ask Maya questions about whether Mommy ever left her alone or acted strange or did anything scary. Maya answered with 7-year-old honesty that was both beautiful and terrifying. Mommy works a lot, and sometimes she cries at night, but she thinks I'm sleeping, and sometimes we eat spaghetti for 3 days, but she always makes sure I eat first, and she's the best mommy even though we don't have a lot of money like Daddy does. Rodriguez documented everything in his report, then spoke to Sarah privately while Maya was distracted by her puzzle books. Ms. Chen, there's nothing here that suggests neglect. Your apartment is clean, your daughter is healthy and well-adjusted. You're clearly doing the best you can with limited resources. I'll note in my report that the complaint appears to be motivated by custody conflict rather than genuine welfare concerns. Will that help in court? It should. Judges generally don't appreciate parents who weaponize child protective services for personal vendettas. Your ex-husband's complaint is now documented as baseless, which undermines his credibility. After Rodriguez left, Sarah held Maya close and cried with relief and exhaustion and the overwhelming sense that she was fighting a battle she barely understood against an opponent with infinite resources and no ethical boundaries. But she had something Derek didn't know about yet, something that would change the equation if she could learn to wield it properly. She had a frozen volcano filled with rubies, and she had her grandmother's trust that she would use that wealth wisely, and she had determination forged from months of barely surviving. Jennifer Park's office was in a renovated warehouse in Portland's Pearl District, all exposed brick and floor-to-ceiling windows, designed to project strength and success to clients who needed both. Sarah arrived 15 minutes early, having left Maya with Jessica again after promising this would be the last favor for a while. The attorney who emerged to greet her was maybe 45, with sharp eyes and a handshake that communicated competence before a single word was spoken. She led Sarah to a conference room where documents were already spread across the table, Derek's custody petition and Sarah's response, and the welfare check report Rodriguez had filed. Robert Whitmore sent me preliminary information about your case, but I need to hear it from you directly. Tell me everything, and I mean everything, including parts you think might make you look bad. I can't help you if I don't know what I'm defending. So Sarah told her, starting with Derek's affair and the coffee mug she'd thrown at the wall, through the divorce and custody battle and eviction notice, ending with Margaret's volcanic property and the ruby-filled caves that had transformed her circumstances overnight. Jennifer listened without interrupting, occasionally making notes, but mostly just absorbing information with the focus of someone trained to find patterns in chaos. When Sarah finished, Jennifer leaned back in her chair and exhaled slowly. Okay, this is complex but manageable. The inheritance itself is your strongest asset, both financially and legally. Washington is a community property state for marital assets, but inheritance received. After divorce is separate property, not subject to equitable distribution. That means Derek has no legal claim to the volcanic property or its contents. But his lawyers will argue I'm hiding wealth. They'll argue, and we'll counter by documenting everything transparently. The property transfer is public record. Margaret's will is public record. The sale of inherited assets through legitimate channels is legal and appropriate. What you're not required to disclose is the total value of undiscovered assets on the property, because that's speculative until professionally assessed. Sarah felt hope flickering cautiously. So, I don't have to tell them about the ruby deposits? Not yet. We'll disclose that you inherited volcanic property containing mineral formations of potential value that you're evaluating for future commercial or personal extraction. That's honest without being specific, and it gives us time to develop proper strategy before revealing the full scope of what you discovered. They spent 3 hours developing that strategy. Jennifer asking detailed questions about Margaret's research, the cave system, the Rubies samples, Thomas Way's purchase, everything that could become evidence in custody proceedings or civil litigation if Derek decided to challenge the inheritance. By the end, Sarah had clear instructions. Document everything related to the property. Get professional geological assessment of the ruby deposits. Consult with tax attorneys about reporting requirements for mineral discoveries on private land. Establish trust fund for Maya's future that would protect assets regardless of custody outcome. One more thing, Jennifer said as they were wrapping up. Your ex-husband's complaint about neglect and illegal income suggests he has information about your activities that he shouldn't have access to. That means either someone close to you is sharing information or he's hired someone to surveil you. Either way, assume everything you do is being monitored and documented. The paranoia that followed Sarah home from Portland felt justified rather than neurotic. She started checking her car for tracking devices, covering her phone's camera, being careful about conversations in public spaces where she might be overheard or recorded. The custody hearing was now 4 weeks away, and Sarah spent that time methodically building her defense. She moved to a better apartment using 6 months' rent paid up front in cash, securing a 2-bedroom with a yard in proximity to Maya's school. She hired Jennifer Park on a substantial retainer that she could finally afford. She had the welfare check report and Officer Rodriguez's documentation that Derek's complaint was baseless harassment. And she had something Derek didn't know about, something she was beginning to understand might be her greatest weapon or her greatest liability, depending on how she wielded it. A frozen volcano filled with enough rubies to ensure Maya's future regardless of what any judge decided. But using that wealth required careful strategy, perfect timing, and a willingness to reveal secrets Margaret had protected for 15 years. Sarah wasn't ready for that revelation yet, wasn't ready to transform her grandmother's geological wonder into tabloid headlines and mining company proposals and all the ways money changed people and relationships and the basic equation of what mattered. For now, she would fight with the resources she had. 3 rubies sold for $62,000 and the knowledge that if things got desperate enough, she had access to wealth that dwarfed Derek's pharmaceutical income and his new wife's real estate career and everything they could marshal against her. The volcano waited, frozen and patient, holding secrets that Sarah was only beginning to understand. And Maya remained the center of everything. The reason any of this mattered, the daughter Sarah would fight for with every resource at her disposal, including ones that scared her with their magnitude and implications. For weeks until the hearing. For weeks to prepare for battle that would determine whether financial security came too late to save what mattered most. The custody hearing arrived on a November morning that threatened snow. The courthouse steps slick with ice that made Sarah's heels feel treacherous. She'd dressed carefully in a navy suit Jennifer had helped her select, projecting stability and competence, looking like someone who could provide for a daughter rather than someone who'd been evicted 3 months ago. Maya was in school, spared from witnessing the legal machinery that would determine her future. Jessica had agreed to pick her up if the hearing ran late. Another favor Sarah had accepted with gratitude that felt like accumulating debt she'd never fully repay. Derek arrived with his attorney, a woman named Patricia Morrison whose reputation for ruthless family law practice preceded her like a warning. Derek's new wife, Vanessa, stood beside him, her hand possessively on his arm, her expensive coat and perfect makeup a visual argument that they could provide better for Maya than Sarah ever could. Jennifer appeared at Sarah's elbow, her presence immediately grounding. Remember what we discussed. Answer questions directly. Don't volunteer information. Let me object when appropriate. You're not on trial here, despite how it might feel. But it felt exactly like a trial as they entered the courtroom, as the judge took her seat and reviewed the case file with an expression that revealed nothing. Judge Catherine Walsh had a reputation for fairness, but also for impatience with parents who weaponized the court system for personal vendettas. Patricia Morrison began with surgical precision, building a case that Derek provided superior stability, superior resources, superior environment for raising a child. She presented evidence of Sarah's eviction, her inconsistent employment, her financial struggles documented through collection notices and unpaid medical bills. Your Honor, Mr. Chen has maintained steady employment with annual income exceeding $180,000. He owns a 4-bedroom home in an excellent school district. He can provide tutoring, extracurricular activities, college savings, everything a child needs for optimal development. Ms. Chen, by contrast, has been unable to maintain stable housing, has worked multiple low-wage jobs, has at times relied on friend for childcare because she couldn't afford proper arrangements. Jennifer rose smoothly. Objection, Your Honor. Counsel is conflating financial resources with parenting quality. Ms. Chen's financial difficulties stem from the divorce settlement that heavily favored Mr. Chen and from her decision to prioritize caregiving over career advancement during the marriage. The court's previous custody arrangement recognized that both parents are capable, and nothing has changed except Mr. Chen's desire to reduce his child support obligations. Judge Walsh's eyes narrowed slightly. Ms. Morrison, I've reviewed the case file. Your client pays $800 monthly in child support for a child who resides primarily with her mother. That's remarkably low given his income. What's the basis for seeking custody modification beyond his ex-wife's financial struggles that his inadequate support partially created? Patricia recovered quickly. Your Honor, we're also concerned about Ms. Chen's recent behavior. She made an unexplained trip to Seattle, left her daughter with friends for extended periods, and has come into unexplained income that she's failed to properly disclose. There are questions about the source of this income that raise concerns about her judgment and potentially illegal activity. Sarah felt her chest tighten, but Jennifer's hand on her arm steadied her. Your Honor, Ms. Chen inherited property from her recently deceased grandmother. She has properly disclosed this inheritance and has been liquidating inherited assets through legitimate channels to address the financial crisis Mr. Chen's inadequate support created. There is nothing illegal or inappropriate about managing an inheritance responsibly. Judge Walsh looked directly at Sarah. Ms. Chen, can you explain the inheritance and recent income? Sarah stood, keeping her voice steady despite her racing heart. Your Honor, my grandmother Margaret Morrison passed away in October. She left me 8 acres of volcano property in Washington state. The property contains mineral formations that have some value. I've sold a small amount of inherited gemstones through legitimate dealers to address immediate financial needs, including securing stable housing for my daughter. What kind of gemstones? Natural rubies, Your Honor. The volcanic property contains ruby deposits that my grandmother discovered and documented over many years. The courtroom went silent. Even Patricia Morrison looked momentarily surprised, which suggested Derek hadn't known the specific nature of Sarah's inheritance, only that money had appeared. Judge Walsh leaned forward. Ms. Chen, are you telling this court that you discovered a ruby mine on inherited property? Not a mine, Your Honor. Natural formations in volcanic caves that contain gem-quality rubies. I've sold 3 stones to address eviction and legal costs. The total value of the deposits is unknown because I haven't conducted full geological assessment yet. Patricia saw her opening. Your Honor, this raises significant questions. What is the total value? Why hasn't it been properly assessed and disclosed? Could there be assets here that should be considered in custody determination or in modification of the divorce settlement? Jennifer responded immediately. Your Honor, inheritance received after divorce is a separate property under Washington law. Mr. Chen has no claim to assets Ms. Chen inherited from her grandmother. The fact that those assets have significant potential value is irrelevant to custody determination. Ms. Chen is doing exactly what any responsible parent would do, using inherited resources to provide stability for her child. Judge Walsh was quiet for a long moment, reviewing documents with an expression that revealed active thinking. Finally, she looked up. Here's what I see. Ms. Chen has maintained consistent involvement in her daughter's life despite significant financial hardship. She has prioritized her child's needs, worked multiple jobs to provide basic necessities, and has been the primary caregiver throughout this child's life. The fact that she's recently inherited assets that improve her financial situation is positive, not negative. Mr. Chen, by contrast, has maintained distant involvement, pays minimal child support despite substantial income, and appears to be seeking custody modification primarily because his ex-wife has gained access to resources that make her less dependent on him. I'm not inclined to reward that behavior. Patricia stood quickly. Your Honor, we're concerned about the child's welfare, not Mr. Chen's support obligations. Then Mr. Chen should have demonstrated that concern through his actions over the past 2 years instead of through last-minute legal intervention when his ex-wife's circumstances improved. Judge Walsh closed the case file with finality. I'm denying the petition for custody modification. The existing arrangement stands. Primary custody with Ms. Chen, visitation for Mr. Chen every other weekend, and alternating holidays. However, I'm modifying child support. Mr. Chen's monthly obligation increases to $1,800, retroactive to the date he filed this petition. Derek's face went red, but his attorney placed a restraining hand on his arm before he could speak. Additionally, Judge Walsh continued, I'm ordering both parties to attend co-parenting counseling at Mr. Chen's expense. This pattern of using the court system to harass and intimidate needs to stop. If I see another frivolous petition from either party, there will be sanctions. We're adjourned. Sarah remained standing as the judge left, as Derek and Patricia conferred in angry whispers, as Vanessa's perfect composure cracked into something approaching fury. Jennifer squeezed her shoulder. That's as complete a victory as you could hope for. Not only did we maintain custody, we increased support and documented his harassment. His credibility with this court is destroyed. Outside the courthouse, Sarah called Jessica to share the news, then called Maya's school to arrange pickup herself, wanting to be the one to tell her daughter that they were safe, that they could stay together, that the fighting was over for now. She stood on the icy steps, breathing cold air that felt like possibility, watching Derek and Vanessa drive away in their expensive car, and felt something shift inside her chest. Not triumph exactly, because the victory felt too hard-won and fragile for celebration, but relief. Profound, exhausting relief that she'd fought and won. That wealth had come in time to matter. That Margaret's frozen volcano had saved them both. But the hearing had also revealed her secret to Derek and his attorneys, to court records that were public, to a judge who now knew that Sarah Chen owned Volcano property containing significant ruby deposits. The information would spread, would attract attention Margaret had specifically warned against, would complicate everything that came next. Sarah drove to the volcanic property the following weekend, leaving Maya with Jessica one final time, promising herself this was the last secret expedition before she figured out how to handle the discovery properly and publicly. The November landscape had transformed since her October visit. Snow covered the Forest Service road, making navigation treacherous even with the four-wheel drive truck she'd purchased using Ruby money. The research station appeared through falling snow like something from a winter fairy tale, isolated and beautiful and impossibly remote. Inside, everything was exactly as she'd left it except colder, the propane heater running on low to prevent pipes from freezing, but not enough to warm the space comfortably. Sarah added more fuel, made coffee from Margaret's dwindling supplies, and sat at the desk where her grandmother had spent 15 years documenting secrets. She needed a plan, not just for managing the ruby deposits, but for honoring Margaret's legacy, for protecting the geological wonder from exploitation, for ensuring that whatever happened next served purposes beyond personal enrichment. The phone Sarah had brought rang despite the limited signal, Thomas Way's name appearing on the screen. She'd given him her number in case he had buyers interested in additional stones, but she hadn't expected contact so soon. Sarah, I hope I'm not interrupting. I wanted to let you know I've been approached by 3 different parties asking about the rubies I purchased from you. Word has spread in the collector community that exceptional natural rubies with volcanic provenance have appeared on the market. Sarah's stomach tightened. Who's asking? Two are legitimate collectors I've worked with for years. But the third concerns me. Mining company representative asking pointed questions about source location, deposit size, your willingness to partner on commercial extraction. I told him nothing, but he's persistent and well-resourced. You should be prepared for more attention. After hanging up, Sarah stood at the window overlooking the volcano, watching snow accumulate on slopes that held wealth beyond measure and complications she was only beginning to understand. Margaret had kept this secret for 15 years through careful discretion and deliberate isolation. But Sarah had revealed it in court, had sold stones through channels that eventually connected to mining companies and commercial interests who saw opportunity where Margaret had seen geological wonder worthy of protection. Mr. Chen, by contrast, has maintained distant involvement, pays minimal child support despite substantial income, and appears to be seeking custody modification primarily because his ex-wife has gained access to resources that make her less dependent on him. I'm not inclined to reward that behavior. Patricia stood quickly. Your Honor, we're concerned about the child's welfare, not Mr. Chen's support obligations. Then Mr. Chen should have demonstrated that concern through his actions over the past 2 years instead of through last-minute legal intervention when his ex-wife's circumstances improved. Judge Walsh closed the case file with finality. I'm denying the petition for custody modification. The existing arrangement stands. Primary custody with Ms. Chen, visitation for Mr. Chen every other weekend, and alternating holidays. However, I'm modifying child support. Mr. Chen's monthly obligation increases to $1,800, retroactive to the date he filed this petition. Derek's face went red, but his attorney placed a restraining hand on his arm before he could speak. Additionally, Judge Walsh continued, I'm ordering both parties to attend co-parenting counseling at Mr. Chen's expense. This pattern of using the court system to harass and intimidate needs to stop. If I see another frivolous petition from either party, there will be sanctions. We're adjourned. Sarah remained standing as the judge left, as Derek and Patricia conferred in angry whispers, as Vanessa's perfect composure cracked into something approaching fury. Jennifer squeezed her shoulder. That's as complete a victory as you could hope for. Not only did we maintain custody, we increased support and documented his harassment. His credibility with this court is destroyed. Outside the courthouse, Sarah called Jessica to share the news, then called Maya's school to arrange pickup herself, wanting to be the one to tell her daughter that they were safe, that they could stay together, that the fighting was over for now. She stood on the icy steps, breathing cold air that felt like possibility, watching Derek and Vanessa drive away in their expensive car, and felt something shift inside her chest. Not triumph exactly, because the victory felt too hard-won and fragile for celebration, but relief. Profound, exhausting relief that she'd fought and won. That wealth had come in time to matter. That Margaret's frozen volcano had saved them both. But the hearing had also revealed her secret to Derek and his attorneys, to court records that were public, to a judge who now knew that Sarah Chen owned Volcano property containing significant ruby deposits. The information would spread, would attract attention Margaret had specifically warned against, would complicate everything that came next. Sarah drove to the volcanic property the following weekend, leaving Maya with Jessica one final time, promising herself this was the last secret expedition before she figured out how to handle the discovery properly and publicly. The November landscape had transformed since her October visit. Snow covered the Forest Service road, making navigation treacherous even with the four-wheel drive truck she'd purchased using Ruby money. The research station appeared through falling snow like something from a winter fairy tale, isolated and beautiful and impossibly remote. Inside, everything was exactly as she'd left it except colder, the propane heater running on low to prevent pipes from freezing, but not enough to warm the space comfortably. Sarah added more fuel, made coffee from Margaret's dwindling supplies, and sat at the desk where her grandmother had spent 15 years documenting secrets. She needed a plan, not just for managing the ruby deposits, but for honoring Margaret's legacy, for protecting the geological wonder from exploitation, for ensuring that whatever happened next served purposes beyond personal enrichment. The phone Sarah had brought rang despite the limited signal, Thomas Way's name appearing on the screen. She'd given him her number in case he had buyers interested in additional stones, but she hadn't expected contact so soon. "Sarah, I hope I'm not interrupting. I wanted to let you know I've been approached by 3 different parties asking about the rubies I purchased from you. Word has spread in the collector community that exceptional natural rubies with volcanic provenance have appeared on the market." Sarah's stomach tightened. "Who's asking?" "2 are legitimate collectors I've worked with for years. But the third concerns me. Mining company representative asking pointed questions about source location, deposit size, your willingness to partner on commercial extraction." I told him nothing, but he's persistent and well-resourced. You should be prepared for more attention. After hanging up, Sarah stood at the window overlooking the volcano, watching snow accumulate on slopes that held wealth beyond measure and complications she was only beginning to understand. Margaret had kept this secret for 15 years through careful discretion and deliberate isolation. But Sarah had revealed it in court, had sold stones through channels that eventually connected to mining companies and commercial interests who saw opportunity where Margaret had seen geological wonder worthy of protection. Significance. Ms. Chen plans to establish the Morrison Geological Preserve, protecting the site for scientific research while selectively extracting minerals to fund preservation efforts and educational programs. The media coverage was immediate and intense. Local news stations requesting interviews, geological journals wanting access for research papers, mining companies proposing partnership arrangements that Sarah's attorneys fielded and politely declined. But Sarah kept Maya protected from most of it, maintaining their routine of school and homework and bedtime stories, ensuring her daughter's life stayed grounded in normal childhood experiences rather than the surreal circumstances their lives had become. Derek tried one final legal maneuver, filing motion to reconsider the custody arrangement given material change in financial circumstances, but Judge Walsh denied it without hearing, noting in her written order that inheritance received after divorce does not constitute ground for custody modification, and Mr. Chen's continued attempts to weaponize the court system are noted. By summer, the preservation plans were well underway. The county had approved Sarah's proposal, recognizing the property's scientific value and the economic benefits of geological tourism. The research station was being expanded into a proper facility where scientists could study the formations and document the unique conditions that had created them. And Sarah had extracted enough rubies, sold through Thomas Way's discreet channels, to secure everything she and Maya needed for the foreseeable future. Not billionaire wealth, but comfortable security, freedom from financial fear, ability to make choices based on what mattered rather than what survival demanded. On a warm June evening, Sarah drove Maya to the volcanic property for the first time, wanting her daughter to see where they'd come from, to understand Margaret's legacy, to connect with the grandmother she'd never met, but who'd saved them both from a distance. They hiked the trail to the research station, Maya excited by the adventure, asking endless questions about the volcano and the rubies and great-grandma Margaret, who'd kept secrets for so long. At the research station, Sarah showed Maya the photographs on the walls, explained what a geologist did, pointed out the survey maps documenting 15 years of careful exploration. Then she pulled out Margaret's letter, the original that Whitmore had sent her, and read it aloud so Maya could hear her great-grandmother's voice speaking across death and time. "Make this count," Sarah read, her voice catching on the final line. "I love you, my darling girl. I'm sorry we lost so many years." Maya was quiet for a moment, processing. Then she asked, "Did she know about me? Did she know I existed?" Sarah thought about Margaret's letter, about the hope contained in leaving this inheritance to a granddaughter with a family of her own, about trust that spanned generations. "I think she knew you existed in the way that mattered. She knew I might have children someday, that they might need what she left behind. She was thinking about all of us, about family she'd never meet but loved anyway." They spent the night in the research station, sleeping in the bunks Margaret had used, waking to sunrise over the volcanic landscape that had transformed their lives. Sarah made breakfast on the camping stove, and Maya helped organize specimens on the workbench, both of them working in comfortable silence. Before they left, Sarah placed a new photograph on the wall beside Margaret's collection. Maya's school picture from second grade, smiling with missing teeth and wild hair. Visual proof that Margaret's legacy continued, that her gift had saved the family she'd never stopped loving despite years of separation. The drive back to Riverside felt different, less like fleeing back to normal life, and more like carrying Margaret's presence with them, integrating the volcanic property into their story rather than keeping it separate and secret. Sarah's phone buzzed with a text from Jennifer Park, University of Washington Geology Department, requesting access for graduate research. Looks like Margaret's work is going to be studied and celebrated. She'd be proud. Sarah smiled, watching Maya draw pictures of the volcano in her notebook, already planning stories to tell her friends about her great-grandmother, the scientist who discovered rubies in a frozen mountain. Margaret would be proud, not because of the wealth or the media attention or the preservation that bore her name, but because Sarah had used the inheritance the way it was intended, to build stability, to protect family, to make choices that honored both discovery and discoverer. The frozen volcano waited, patient and permanent, holding rubies that would take decades to fully extract and study, holding Margaret's legacy in crystalline formations that had grown for millennia before humans ever climbed those slopes and wondered what lay beneath. And Sarah Chen, who'd started this journey with $847 and an eviction notice, drove home to their apartment with her daughter beside her, both of them safe and secure and free from the grinding fear of poverty that had defined so much of Sarah's adult life. Some inheritances were measured in dollars. Others were measured in possibility, in the space between desperation and hope, in the transformation that happened when someone who'd been drowning finally found solid ground. Margaret's gift had been all of those things, wealth and wisdom and the understanding that value wasn't always what society said it was, that some treasures were frozen in mountains waiting for the right person to find them, that love could transcend death if you trusted the right people with your secrets. Sarah had been the right person, and Maya would carry that legacy forward, would grow up knowing that her great-grandmother had saved them, would understand that sometimes the most valuable inheritance wasn't money but the example of how to use wealth wisely, compassionately, with purpose beyond personal gain. The frozen volcano stood patient against the summer sky, its secrets revealed but not exhausted, its rubies continuing to grow in darkness and pressure and geological time that made human concerns feel temporary and small. But the human concerns mattered anyway. Maya's happiness mattered. Sarah's freedom from financial terror mattered. Margaret's hope that her discovery would serve good purposes mattered. And all of it was connected. The rubies and the custody battle and the research station and the eviction notice and the grandmother who died alone but had ensured her family wouldn't face the same fate. Sarah pulled into their apartment complex, helped Maya carry her backpack and drawings inside, started dinner while her daughter told elaborate stories about the volcano and the cave and all the adventures they'd have returning there over the years. And for the first time since Ellen had died, since Derek had destroyed their marriage, since the eviction notice had appeared on her door, Sarah felt something approaching peace. Not perfect happiness, because life was more complicated than that, but security, hope, the knowledge that she'd fought and survived and protected what mattered most. The frozen volcano had saved them. Margaret's gift had transformed their lives. And Sarah Chen, single mother and custodian of geological wonders, had learned that some battles were worth fighting, that desperation could become determination, that betrayed women could become warriors when given the weapons to fight back. The rubies glittered in her memory, frozen fire beneath volcanic stone, waiting to be discovered by the next generation of scientists who would study Margaret's work and understand that some legacies transcended individual lives and became part of something larger, more permanent, more valuable than wealth alone could ever measure. Thank you so much for watching until the end. If you love this story, check out the other videos on your screen now. I think you'll really enjoy them. And don't forget to subscribe if you haven't already. See you in the next story.